throw a slide up just so that we've got something to look at here. It's always something. Today we're here to be talking about creating a strategic vulnerability response program or plan. I don't know, has anybody seen the new spring RCE vulnerability that just dropped? We were talking about it beforehand. It was news to me until one of our subject matter experts and technical people over at PlexTrac brought it up. The word is this is going to be the next Kaminsky level event across the internet. The thing that's going to have the red team salivating and the blue team freaking out. This isn't new. These sorts of vulnerabilities we've seen time and time again, going back to Heartbleed. When they get a logo, they get a name. We talk about them, but every time they come out, they seem to be some sort of surprise. So the idea was to kind of go over today with our presenters here. And if you just joined us, we've got Patrick Fussell, the operations lead from IBM X-Force, and Daniel Brown, the penetration testing manager from Blend Labs, joining us to give us different perspectives on the vulnerability issue and how they would approach the response plans. Daniel's perspective is from the internal team, the corporate organization, the red team that he manages, and Patrick's from the consultancy, helping large enterprise customers, kind of wade through these issues on a day-by-day, month-by-month, quarter-by-quarter basis. And I am Joe Pierini. I am the product evangelist for PlexTrac. Now, PlexTrac is a reporting and collaboration platform. So, we all love to be Tom Cruise, drop from the ceiling, do tippy-tappy on the keyboard, do the thing, go, we're in. And then no one really likes to go back to the office to have to report on it. So that's where PlexTrac kind of fits in that niche, providing the tools for writing the report, collaborating with your peers, writing it once, and then being able to reuse it over and over with strong templates. And then you can also have your project managers and even your clients inside the platform. So you can do vulnerability analysis, you can do Jira, you can move the remediation straight into ServiceNow. You can do analytics to see how you're doing year over year over year. So that's the platform that lets you take the skills that Patrick and Daniel and the rest of us have and be able to articulate it in a way that's actionable and that customers can really use. So, Patrick, we had introductions earlier on in the during the chit chat beforehand, but for people who have just joined, what are you up to these days?
Sure. Yeah. So like you mentioned, I'm the operations lead for the Adversary simulation team at X-Force Red. Just to give a little bit of context, when Joe asked me to jump into this, the perspective that we kind of have hashed out a little bit is, my sort of brain mostly gets taken up with thinking about clients' ability to detect and respond to attackers. So really kind of digging into what they have in place and how capable what they have is, and it's definitely a little bit unique from like what Daniel is sort of thinking about. So that's why I thought it was sort of an interesting combination of people to have here to go over the concept.
Cool. Are you seeing any trends that we didn't expect when we worked together? We were in regulatory testing and kind of short, sort of 1 to 2 week pen tests. But are you seeing any different trends in your practice that we didn't see in the past?
Yeah, speaking really broadly, it's funny because I think about the time that some of the people on the team started to go separate ways, there was definitely some shift in what the discussion even about a sort of objective-based penetration test would look like. And I think what I'm driving at is we saw more focus on things like defensive technology starting to come into play. I think that one of the really big changes has been the move to things like technologies like EDR. They give I think a totally different level of visibility on endpoints. I remember I remember the first time we saw something like carbon black on an endpoint. It was the first time we actually, saw actual application whitelisting. We were all kind of floored for about a day before we, had to kind of go back and rethink how do we fix this. So I think a movement towards those types of technologies is changing the face of security a little bit, probably for the better. But that's the big change, and part of that may be I'm working with a different sort of set of clients, but I think that's probably true across the board for any kind of big enterprise.
Okay, agreed. That having been out of the field certainly for a couple of years with COVID, I appreciate that sort of feedback. Is that something that you're seeing over at Blend, Daniel? Why don't you introduce yourself to the 379 people who have now joined?
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. No pressure.
Yeah, appreciate that. I didn't see the number until now, so thanks a lot for that.
Half of America is well.
So as Joe said, my name is Daniel Brown. I am the Red Team and Penetration Testing Manager for Blend. Little plug for Blend. Blend, we provide software as a service for financial institutions. So there's a very good chance that if you applied for a mortgage, for example, recently with bunch of different banks, you very well may have been using Blend's platform for that. So it's a little bit about what Blend does. Our biggest job is a little bit different from the consultancy side of thing and what Patrick's trying to do. So we're trying to make Patrick's job a living hell, to be honest with you. We're trying to find it all first. So when it comes down for us, what the biggest concerns and what we're really looking for is things like effective RBAC, or is our EDR solution actually working? What are the ways around it and the pitfalls? And can we almost purple team to a degree to find ways to do custom signatures or ways to do secure access to our various resources? So that's kind of what we do from the internal perspective. As far as what our kind of trends that we see is really with third parties, whether that's single sign-on providers or supply chain attacks, or God forbid these package dependent kind of vulnerabilities that come down the line. We try to keep our ear to the ground on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but kind of what we do in the event of a compromise, and how my team can help the operations team to at least identify where we have problems.
Okay. Beautiful. It's so good to see you guys again and to talk with you again, and we can chit chat about the old days, forever after this, but let's get to the business at hand, which is, vulnerability response programs. Are they the missing piece of the larger layered cyber approach that organizations have? I mean, for example, we've got programs like the threat intelligence lifecycle. So we've got requirements gathering and data collection, data processing, data analysis, all that. That's well established. And then vulnerability management programs for identifying, classifying, and remediating vulnerabilities. And we've got incident response programs with preparation and identification, containment, eradication, recovery. Those are frameworks that we have fairly well established, but those logoed Kaminsky level internet crippling vulnerabilities, we don't have a response program for this. And that's been, something I've been thinking about since we were back at our consultancy working together. It's like, these shouldn't be coming as a surprise. And yet every time a new one comes out and the red teams salivate, and the blue teams freak out, and the SOC is going, oh my God, what are we going to do? And it just seems like it keeps catching us off guard, and it shouldn't. So first off, the first question I have is logoed and named vulnerabilities. Is this good for us? Is this good for cybersecurity? Does the hype encourage people to patch, or does it make them tune out? What are your thoughts?
Oh man, that's such a and it's funny. As you're describing it, I started to think about some different aspects that I hadn't considered when we first hashed this out a little bit. I think this has some corollaries to the offensive tooling publishing sort of side of the house, right? Like if you know about these vulnerabilities, how should they be disclosed, and how do we do it in a way that helps people patch them ahead of time? And I feel like if looking back on quite a few of the logo vulnerabilities, frequently they're done to help the publisher, whoever's disclosing these bugs, to get sort of some notoriety. But that being said, I feel like I have had conversations with clients where they're talking about something more seriously because it has sort of a little bit of a cachet to it. It's because everybody knows, and it bubbles up to people who wouldn't normally talk about it. So where something might stop at your CISO before, now your CTO is he got it in a list somewhere, and it looks big and scary. And so he says, well, we should go fix all the things. And now you have the sort of political power inside of an organization to go, we need resources to fix this thing right away. So there could be some value there. But there's probably a good and evil side to that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I agree 110%. I mean, overall, I think, yes, they are good. I mean, and I think a perfect example is a little bit of a throwback here, but how many non-technical people know what MS 08067 was? Probably not many, but almost everybody knows what Eternal Blue was, even if they weren't directly aware of it. And can you imagine hopping on and watching the news and hearing somebody give a CVE number out for some scary thing like Spectre or something like that? No, I mean, you can't. So overall, I do think they are a good idea. And to Patrick's point, more and more companies now have CIOs, CTOs, so they may not be as needed, but you still have to get the point across to the people who pay the bills and fund the budget and give you the staff. So I think overall, yes, it's a good thing.
Okay. I just, when my mom said, did you hear about Heartbleed? It feels like it jumped the shark at that point. Like, oh, damn it. My mother knows about it. Has the hype gotten so bad that, the people who really need to do something about it have just kind of tuned it out. So I was curious from your perspectives, whether or not this was
But what's the downside? What's the downside to your mother-in-law knowing about it?
Well, to my mom knowing about it, it means that a high level that maybe the rest of us are just like blowing it off now because it's hyped too much.
Well, Daniel, I would ask you too. I was thinking about what, as Joe was describing that, I was thinking, I guess the danger is people who are making sort of decisions without really understanding about the risk profile of these things. Is somebody ever calling you and say, hey, we need to go fix this thing right away, no matter what, drop what you're doing. But you don't have a chance to give them the context of like, hey, it's not actually really a problem for us but they don't, they're not going to listen to that. So I wonder, are people getting forced to go remediate things when they understand that the risk isn't that bad because it has, a logo and it sounds scary?
Somebody saw it on Good Morning America.
Yeah. So
exactly.
I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of lucky. I've got a CISO that kind of acts as a shield, who knows what he's talking about. So overall, not really. But I will say, when I did some consulting for the government, yes, just to answer your question, yes, we'd have somebody who's fairly not technical coming down, and I think at the time it was Spectre. Coming down and really raising all the flags, which was fine, but we didn't meet some of the prerequisites, or there was really nothing we could do other than monitor because nothing had been released yet. So I definitely understand that kind of danger, and you're always going to have it. But in my eyes, InfoSec is kind of, and pen testing in particular, are kind of thankless until they have something to blame. It kind of it kind of raises our profile a little bit. If this big named vulnerability comes out and all of a sudden we're not susceptible to it, or we react way quicker than our clients and other third parties have, I mean, that helps. That makes us look even better, that we're doing a job that helps the company.
All right. I hadn't thought about that. So it does raise our visibility within the organizations and to our clients as something other than that necessary evil that has to happen once a year or twice a year.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if it's a good thing for us, then should we have a vulnerability response program? And is that something that we build in, the red team, blue team area, or is that something for the SOC? I mean, if we were going to build a vulnerability response program, who needs to be part of that team?
It's funny when you first mentioned the question to me. My initial reaction was, well, should this exist? And I thought, well, it certainly does. Like, these functions have to already be present in the company. But then I thought about it a little more. Yeah, there's definitely it's a very specific hole in sort of generally how we think about how we respond to issues that come up in InfoSec. And I think what I was thinking was, well, certainly your incident response, however that's designed in your company, would be able to capture this. I think you're right that they don't necessarily. And then I thought, well, maybe your vulnerability management, whether that's something you're outsourcing or you have your own sort of internal testing, inside of an enterprise, maybe they would be the people who are capturing this. But I think that they're not really a response sort of function. So, I think you're right. It's a missing function, but I think that the reaction, or where this sort of responsibility should live, is probably somewhere in between the two. I would imagine, however you structure your incident response, whoever it is that leads that up, part of your blue team, should be synchronized with how you manage your sort of generic vulnerability management system or program, and that there's a place for vulnerability response inside of that. That's just not right now. It just isn't defined for most people.
Yeah. Go ahead. Joe.
No, go, Danny.
No, I agree with Patrick overall. I would say, I mean, obviously it depends on what you have in your existing security team. But in my experience, if you have a really well-defined instance response program and you have a really good asset management solution, which I'll feed it into that, sure. I'm not sure a program necessarily is right for all companies, where a policy or a procedure even. If you have effective policies and programs in place, then it should be something that you should be able to document relatively quickly. So, for example, Log4j, the blue team took it over and did patching, and red team was there to verify if either the patching worked or something was missed. I mean, it certainly is a collaborative effort, but whether or not that boils down to a named vulnerability response program, I'm not sure.
Okay. So what about the other part of that I would bring up, Daniel, that may fall into what you're describing, is when these vulnerabilities get published, I think one of the first questions that people ask is, well, has it already been exploited in the wild? Like, how long has this been around before we know about it, right? And so then part of that process is, do we need to look at logs? Do we need to be doing forensics on any of the systems? What are the chances it's been exploited? And how do we what is the tooling we need to perform all of those things, which is where I think the sort of incident response piece can be kind of complex, and how that fits together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and generating logs is one of the things that I think Red Team does best. Is if you want to see what it's going to look like, let us either build a proof of concept or find a proof of concept, vet it, and trigger it so you know what you're looking for.
Sure. Yeah.
So we've got the Spring RCE, what they're calling Spring Shell or Spring 4 Shell, that just dropped like a day ago. So the teams that get together to work on this is our vulnerability. Either it's just a straight procedure if you think you've got all the other aspects of your team in place, but if you don't have the threat intel group or the vulnerability management group or an incident response team, then there might be some value in building a separate program that gets all of the representatives from all of the disciplines, at least getting all the stakeholder names and phone numbers and who to call down first, because a lot of times, it hits the fan, and who do we call? Who do we wake up? So having identification of the representatives might be step one in preparation. Step two, what else do we need to build this out? Asset management, you talked about, Daniel.
I think it's single-handedly the most important part of all of this.
I think so. Why is it such a big problem?
you can't fix what you can't find. I mean,
I get that, but why can't we find out our assets? I mean, you and I and Patrick have walked into countless organizations where, we do a little scanning, we run mass scan, we do a little OSINT, and we come up with this list of stuff that they didn't tell us about.
Well, I mean, so in a traditional network, I'm not sure there's an excuse, to be quite frank.
Okay.
But as we move to hybrid and fully cloud-based, I mean, I can't think of a company that really only exists in one cloud. And talking amongst VPCs and different ways of accessing it, and similar to shadow IT, you've got shadow systems being spun up that maybe you don't know about. I mean, it becomes a nightmare, to be honest with you. So having an effective solution in place, whether that's I think IBM has a solution for it, or a continuous compliance solution like Jupyter One or something like that. All of these to kind of pull in all this information to where it can't hide from you. So that, I mean, honestly, if we were to boil it down to one specific thing that we're going to talk about today, I think this right here is key.
I think one of the things that you keyed on, Daniel, to me that really describes why at least the asset management piece is so challenging is it always comes down to the administering your network, right? At some point, you need people and times and hours and skill sets to have really good management. I think, if you think about like what is good detection and response looks like on an endpoint, I think if it was in a perfect world, if you could describe exactly what it looks like, it's almost indistinguishable from good asset management. Maybe it's if you know everything about every endpoint in your network all the time, obviously that's impossible. But if you know everything about every server, then you're never going to have an uptime problem because you're going to be able to predict when that system starts to have problems. Well, the same sorts of information points also have strong ties to if someone's doing something on that host that they shouldn't be. So understanding exactly what you own is great, but that's only in a perfect world. I think, think about there's people behind computers at a help desk somewhere who have to do all the administration for these systems, or architects that have to design how does this DC talk to that DC without, poking holes in a firewall somewhere. And they probably have somebody breathing down the neck. And is that person giving them the time and the resources they need to put good practices into place? Or is management bought in on making sure that everything is architected in a secure way? And if they're not, then you're never going to have good asset management, because Joe Schmo and your satellite office in the middle of nowhere, if he's got to get something system up to make business run, he's going to do whatever he has to do to make business work. And if that's putting systems in a cloud or something, then you're that's where you get those sort of holes get poked in your ability to understand what's going on in your network.
No, absolutely. And as consultants, we all saw that in the past. I mean, everything looks good on paper until somebody makes that exception or that exemption. I mean, I do think there are mechanisms that you can implement to kind of squash that. I think a great example is a tool like Terraform. You can put in these different rules that basically disallow for execution without the right people or right policies being applied. And then when I say asset management, I mean, I agree. I mean, I'm sure in the old days you were using a spreadsheet. That would be absolutely impossible. But if you can automate that process to where, okay, I know at least just from billing, we exist in Amazon, we exist in GCP, and or we have 5 different VPCs or whatever the case may be. If you automate the process and have some sort of asset management tool that will automatically import what you need, I think a lot of that does get squashed. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, but I do think it's a way to go about it.
I think that's an incredible point, Daniel. Just in billing, just going back and finding out who you're paying to host your stuff is a piece of OSINT that of course we don't have access to when we're coming in as consultants, but from the internal team, yeah, actually that's kind of an interesting piece.
Someone's got to pay.
Someone's got to pay for it. Sure. Patrick, are you getting, when you're doing your engagements, are you getting enough? Are consultant or are your clients giving you enough time to do OSINT to find those missing pieces? Because it can be such an important part of that first step.
Yeah, so we structure our engagements in sort of two really broad ways, where we have some clients want to see us go from the outside in. They want to understand what's that external attack surface is. So in those cases, yeah, we do put some fair amount of effort into good OSINT, especially if there's a social engineering campaign that's going to go along with it. Find that usually really good OSINT will fuel a good social engineering campaign that really ups your chances of getting the access that you're looking for. So yeah, the other sort of approach for us is we do kind of the assume breach approach, where we work with a client to figure out how are we gonna work this, that our access appears legitimate, but we'll leverage it to do the rest of the testing. And we do kind of find that kind of what we're really driving at here, that most of the time the things that are the most interesting are when someone says, oh, we forgot about that one host, or somebody configured that and they weren't supposed to. Like, that's not what was supposed to be there. So those tend to be the most interesting discoveries, when you say, hey, you guys gave us this as the attack scope, but we think that this is also yours, and it looks like it has problems.
Do you think, as an offering, just a straight OSINT engagement, no exploitation, no packet scanning, nothing, but just, hey, here's what we think our internet footprint looks like. Go spend a week and validate. Now, Daniel, you're talking about systems within the cloud that are coming up and down, and there's probably not a lot of value to spending a week trying to find those, because it's too dynamic. It's going to change. But for those traditional networks and those organizations that still haven't moved considerable resources to the cloud, I mean, is that one way of augmenting your asset management without breaking the bank, or is that just my passion project where I think it'd be a good idea?
I think that's for you, Patrick.
Yeah. I'm gonna sidestep that just a half step and go back to what Daniel was saying before. I think we think about if we're putting assets in, and let's say I'll go with cloud, because I think it's a good example of something that's an upcoming technology, or becoming more and more prevalent with every day.
Mm-hmm.
If you say we're going to put host some things in AWS, and that could be, hey, we just have these two servers that sit in, they're EC2 servers that sit here and do some sort of menial task. It's not a big deal, all the way up to we have some significant portion of our infrastructure there. When you make that decision to stick something somewhere in terms of your data and your host and your network, I think your first step should always be, do we have the people that have the skill set to support this in a smart way? Daniel's talking about being able to figure out where all your things are. I think if you have really smart DevOps people, or really smart cloud people, solving these problems becomes pretty easy. If I look at our clients that have the most mature programs, they tend to, security programs, they tend to also be hand in hand with having spent time bringing people in to do all their architecture and have really smart people in those seats as well. Because when you say, well, I want to know where all of these things are, if you have a really mature program, you can have somebody says, yeah, no big deal. I can tell you that. I've got a guy who can automate that, or we already have that asset list at hand. It's not a big deal. It's almost indicative of a problem when they say, oh, I don't know if we can figure that out. Like, that's always kind of the first hint that the maturity isn't all the way there yet. So, I think it's always something doable, and there's always solutions that will get you there. The problem is, getting the buy-in from the people who will give you the resources to get them. And, obviously the other part is getting somebody in place who can use those solutions in a smart way. There's always good software or people or whatever it is to solve these sorts of problems. It's just a matter of putting in the elbow grease to deploy them and use them. I mean, how many times did we see somebody would say, yeah, we've got whatever solution that fixes this problem, but they just left it in a default state? And it's like, yeah, if you used it would be great, but you just installed it and called it a day, right?
Handicapping silence.
Yeah, learning mode. It's learning mode. And that was the That was the flaw in the compliance testing that we were doing. Is like they had the technology and they were compliant, but they hadn't implemented the technology correctly to be secure. So that was one of the interesting aspects of that. But I think we're beating asset management to death. If we had to wrap up asset management with 3 tips for a mid-sized business to improve their asset management, what could those be?
Yeah, if you don't have the personnel, automate the process, make it to where you can't not inventory your assets. There are third parties that do it, but if you're starting a new business or you're in a position to where you can do some designing in a way that nothing can get past you, automate what you can.
Okay. You got anything to add to that, Patrick?
I think that's perfect. If you think about all the organizations we looked at, that there was a solution that could have fixed that. Either it's hire somebody who knows that technology or bring in a third party to fix it. Both of those are viable options depending on, obviously a million different factors. I think the other thing I would add is, going back to kind of what we were talking about at the very beginning, if at all possible, put EDR on everything, always, because if nothing else, you've got a list of things. And if one goes away, you should know if an asset disappears off of that list. So I mean, and maybe that's just AV, but have a rule that, like you said, Daniel, make it where it's impossible to have an asset in your infrastructure that doesn't comply to some set of rules that gives you visibility into the fact that they're present, what they're up to.
Okay. All right. So that's step 2. We had preparation, we have asset management. Step 3. I'm going to throw out step 3 would then be monitoring. So the world got nailed by Log4Shell. What were the steps you guys took for monitoring the assets that you knew about and whether or not they were vulnerable to this? I mean, there's a lot of open source tools out there that you could use, Gymnasium, Retire.js, dependency check, stuff like that. But what was useful to you to be able to monitor your assets?
Yeah. So this was a tough one. We aren't Java heavy, but there's a lot of things that either tools that we used or other things of that nature that we weren't sure. And sometimes Java's been better within Java. I mean, it was like a Russian nesting doll almost. Honestly, what we did is we did our best to find everything we could, and then the red team went through with a proof of concept and a C2 server or collaborator and fuzzed like a script kiddie with their first time in Burp Suite Pro. I mean, we just threw the command absolutely everywhere we could get our hands on to see if there was any communication or any type of exposure to us there. We're fairly confident. I'm going to take away fairly. We're confident we found it all. And I think that the experience, to your point of creating a vulnerability response program, the experience with Log4j, I mean, when we get off this, I'll probably have a chat with several people about this new one that just came out yesterday. If we did our job in identifying all the relevant Java instances, it should be relatively easy to find out.
Okay. Goes back to that asset management piece again.
I'm trying not to.
I know, but it goes back. And it's not just knowing whether or not there's a server exists. Now you've got to also know what apps are on it and probably who owns the app so that you can find out whether or not you're using that component. So,
but tools like Jamf or other things of that nature, I'm drawing a blank on the other tools right now. They help with that because you can literally query an entire list, even probably EDR solutions. I'm not sure if things like Cylance or CrowdStrike or whoever actually gives you a list of all installed programs, but I'd imagine they would. So
let's see what maybe somebody in the Discord or in the chat, if they're familiar with the tools that can help, can throw some suggestions in, and we can. I'll keep an eye out on there, and we'll call them out. But yeah, Patrick, what are you guys doing? Are you doing anything for your customers when these things come out in terms of monitoring? Are you letting them know about it, or are you just trying to avoid being part of the noise when this sort of thing happens?
we have a really good, we have a really great part of the team that's separate from the team I'm on, called VMS, and they do some really cool things on the management side in terms of, some of the things we're talking about is like, do these things need attention, and how do we classify them, make sure that they're the things that we're responding to what needs to be responded to, and VMS is the group that handles all that, and they have really interesting technologies in place to assist with that. On my side, when we do an engagement with an adversary simulation engagement with our client, our primary focus is helping them understand what are the capabilities of their detection and response, and that kind of really ties into monitoring. And I think, while we do look at sometimes like specific vulnerabilities, we say, well, you should be able to detect if we do this. We more heavily focus on trying to understand the kind of behavior analytics in an environment. So think about something like Log4j. Obviously, our first concern is anything on the internet that it would be vulnerable to this, because that's the kind of initial line where you're going to get popped, right? We would, when we're working, especially from the outside in, what we're doing is we're detonating some sort of payload, performing some sort of activity against a host, gaining access, then moving. And when we work with the client, we say, did you see all the things that we did? Was there telemetry that was generated at all? So do you have anything in place that could have detected the activity of us landing on the system and getting command and control? They say yes or no. If they say yes, we do have the telemetry, but there was no alert. So we say, well, why wasn't there alert? Was the alerting got raised and it was too low risk? Did a person just miss it? Was it a process that was missed? So we spend quite a bit of effort on this sort of monitoring piece, because we, from the adversary simulation point, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of what's going to make a really mature blue team, a really mature security program for our clients. So we do think about it. I don't think we typically spend too much time thinking about the big logo vulnerabilities, because we try to look at it from a more holistic standpoint of, hey, when somebody gets on, we assume somebody's going to get on one of these systems eventually. What do you do to make sure you're monitoring and detecting after the exploit? So we're kind of looking at the next step, and that's not to say exclusively, but that's where our minds are most of the time.
Purple teaming, love it.
Here's a question for you. This new spring vuln came out, and Alibaba's team announced it on Twitter. How big is social media for your threat monitoring? I don't do threat monitoring on any sort of regular basis, and I would love to know if you've got like specific Twitter feeds that you use, or how are you using social as part of your monitoring, preparation, alerting sort of thing? And I'm hoping that people on the attendees, if they have really good Twitter feeds that they use for new vulnerabilities, new and emerging threats, that they would share it with the rest of us, because I think Twitter can be such a trash fire, but it can also be such a great piece of source of information. Are you guys using it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I know for a fact, it's really about just expanding it organically. So for example, Reddit used to have some great feeds for network security. It's kind of tanked in recent years, in my opinion. But for example, right now, you said the Alibaba group did it. I'll probably go and follow them. Or if I see that Patrick is following somebody or likes a Twitter feed, I'll go check it out. And if it fits my needs, definitely do that. But Patrick can attest to this, and so can you, Joe. So much of your time is spent doing research when you're doing penetration testing or red teaming. You have to stay current. I remember we had a chat, Joe, one time about if you're out of the game for a year, how hard it is to try to make up for a year's worth of knowledge loss. So absolutely, I think social media helps at least start your research.
I got somebody said VX Underground is a good source. Bleeping Computer on Twitter. There's another one.
Hacker News is a decent one if you want to get on their Telegram. So yeah,
Telegram. There's another source of information with this latest lupus dollar symbol something. Pastebin, always a good place for search. Although Pastebin, they started getting like really reactive when good stuff would drop inside Pastebin. The Pastebin team would then go in and get rid of it before you could get your hands on it. That was always very frustrating.
Oh, GitHub's doing it too.
Yeah. And it's kind of annoying. I mean, I want it for a little while. I mean, something. Hopefully Google will have gone ahead and, spidered it, and it can be in cache for a little bit longer than this. You're smiling, Patrick. What are you thinking?
No, yeah, it's funny. The Pastebin, but I think invariably what happens is if Pastebin's making things hard, then that data just goes somewhere else, right? And we have quite a bit of fun on the team. Or a big part of what we do is we have a kind of a channel for sharing, anything that looks like that comes across Twitter that might be a new TTP or new tooling that has potential to be interesting. So it's certainly, I'd say, social media is such an interesting part of understanding the vulnerability landscape, because it's where a lot of the data gets shared, but it's also kind of very informal, which makes it, I think, it's just such a funny place to me, because we'll say, well, I saw so-and-so is doing this like this, we should attempt that. But it's not like, it's not like there's a formal mechanism that shares that data. It's just like happened to catch it on Twitter. Or did you catch it on Twitter? So it's definitely a massive part of the overall picture and the community. But that's almost a larger conversation, I think.
Got it. All right. Well, look, most regulatory regimes have the requirement for monitoring, right? You have to monitor for emerging threats. And CISA's been publishing a number of tools like the KEV, and other announcements that they've been putting out. Are you guys using any of this in the private sector for monitoring or getting the heads up of oncoming storms?
Yeah, I mean, we get so many, anytime some big named vulnerability or even something small comes out, we have all of our customers reaching out going, well, how have you handled this? Have you handled this? So we get a little bit of free OSINT that way, which is nice. But for example, we bought a company last year, and after talking with some of their security team, they have some dark web monitoring in place, and through a third party. And I can't wait to get my hands on it just to kind of see. I've tried some manual stuff that way, but yeah, definitely with the OSINT part, it's very important.
Cool. Patrick, are you using any of the CISA tools at this point?
No, not specifically. No, I mean, we definitely keep it a kind of an ear to the ground when something interesting but I would say that's partially due to the fact that we limit our scope to things that are maybe have potential to be directly applicable to a TTP that we're going to leverage. And sometimes there's things where like, that's never really going to be super applicable to us, or that's not necessarily doesn't fall into the category of being a TTP for a red team. So it's always tough, because you feel like sometimes you get some of these feeds and you look at them and you're like, I'm not even sure who's the person who is curating these lists, and how are they sort of assigning what becomes the thing that gets the most focus, and do I trust those people? So that's why I like the idea of the sort of more informal route, because you get exposed to an idea and you can decide for yourself if it's something that's important or not.
Yeah, I mean, pen testing is about sifting through the bullshit.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that Kev dropped, or the CISA published not too long ago, was like 20-year-old vulnerabilities. Now, okay, well, why are you publishing in a curated list of emerging threats something from 20 years ago? The only thing I could think of was that they're seeing it in the wild. And even though it's been patched 20 years ago, could mean that they're seeing, an increased amount of use on it. So some of it might be just having to read between the lines on some of these curated things, especially from the government. But all right, we're coming down on time, and I think we still have a few more things to complete when it comes to this program, if you will. So far, we've got preparation, we've got asset management, we've talked about monitoring, and then I would argue that the next one might be assessment, comparing these threats with your asset management list and determining whether or not they're an issue. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say, one thing that's tough about this that I feel like maybe gets missed occasionally. It kind of goes a little bit back to what I was taking a stab at earlier with the monitoring pieces. You think about how do we know if this was used against one of our assets? Let's say it's an RCE. We do have a system that is potentially vulnerable, but we only have logs that go back 90 days. It's where the monitoring piece is so critical, because you don't know that this thing's going to be landing on your host, and you don't know that it's a big vulnerability until it gets the logo and the name, and now you're having to go do some sort of response to it. So I think the assessment piece is really scary, especially when you think about the potential for exploitation across time. So I think anytime you're doing assessment in terms of potential impact and how we need to respond, you always have to. I mean, obviously you're going to look at the specific systems and do remediation, but you should always be kind of coupling that with the more holistic approach of understanding, well, if somebody did land on that box, would we have known it? If they had laterally moved off of it, would we have been able to respond to that? So, that's why that sort of assumed breach idea is such a powerful thing. I mean, even when we were doing penetration testing together, how many times did we have the sort of, M&M security model discussion with clients where they would say, well, it's not a problem because we have a firewall. And how many times do you have to describe to them that's a silly concept to a network that, a determined bad guy is going to get in. So, I mean, it's still out there. People still think of security issues that way, I think.
Well, and that's what pays our mortgages. I mean, I want you to be better at protecting your network, but if you're not, I'm in the business of providing, services that will help you. And I'll drag you kicking and screaming, and we have dragged customers kicking and screaming towards security. And that was kind of, is assessing whether or not it's an issue and triaging the same step, or would you assess and then start to triage the work? How? Because now we're operating in areas that I'm assuming, Daniel, you've got a lot more exposure to.
Yeah. So I love that Patrick brought up log retention, because I mean, that's such a huge thing, especially for these 0 days that come out. Maybe they've been in the wild for a while by certain groups, but not just well known yet, and you don't have the logs there. I do think by assessing and then triaging, you come up with action items like, okay, I can't know for sure if they were on this server, so what do? Well, we rotate keys, we change passwords, we take the nuclear options, but almost what you have to do. You have to assume you were breached, and really go from there. So if you can't, in my mind, it's if you can't prove that you weren't, assume you were.
Ouch.
I mean, you have to, right?
Yeah, but so I was a system administrator before I became a pen tester, and there's only so many hours in the day. There are only so many guys I have on my team. If I have to take the nuclear option every single time there's one of these serious vulnerabilities, I might as well just roll the network over every week.
But that's why you have things like Laps, and you have things like Ansible, and you have all these different tools that are at your disposal. Open source, a lot of different tools that you can automate all of that.
I think that's true. I think you should also, on the nuclear option, assume someone's going to breach your network. Like, how do we respond? Well, the real answer is you architect your network in a way that it's not going to be, it's not going to be the end of the world. We assume an advanced attacker is going to be able to do something, but we'll be able to detect and respond, or we've architected our permissions in a way that their impact is going to be limited. Because I think one of the things that I got a really good understanding for when I was doing penetration testing is what administrators tend to miss is trust relationships and how they can be exploited. Because they'll say, well, you can't do that because of this. And we say, well, yeah, actually, you can do that. And there's still a conversation that I have pretty frequently. They say, well, you can't do that because we'll be able to detect it. We said, well, you can't operate under that assumption that you will detect. That's what we're here to, sort of help with is making the sort of the proof, right? And that's the same thing with penetration testing is we prove that, yeah, if that thing is there, we'll exploit it and you'll get access. So I think, the real nuclear option is going back to some of like the really early things that Daniel was describing is good, really, really good role-based access, making sure that your admins never have to make a decision that forces them to poke holes in your security. And I think if you're doing all those things, then you can make a stronger assertion that the impact is going to be significantly more limited, or you're going to be able to respond before it becomes a bigger problem.
Strong permissions, a better understanding of your trust relationships. I would say segmentation would be...
Or zero trust.
Yeah.
Now, the problem I have with zero trust is that I found every zero trust implementation, there was always some place where somebody broke it for convenience. They couldn't do their job. They couldn't do X, Y, Z, whatever. So they bent the rules on their zero trust architecture. And that's how, we were able to get in. So I hate saying there's any one thing that will, is the silver bullet or the panacea, because it may entirely be true, but as we all know, if it's not inconvenient, it's probably not effective.
Yeah.
So, and the moment it's inconvenient, there's some guy trying to figure out how to get around it.
Yeah,
that's true.
If you can administer the systems, then so can I, right? That's what it always comes down to. Is
yes,
somebody has to fix those things.
And you are their most recent and unsalaried network administrator. So
yeah, it's an impossible problem, and I think that I've heard it described. My favorite description is, at some point you're continuing to raise the bar to the point that it's not, there's not the fiscal gain to be had is beyond what your sort of supposed threat actor is going to be willing to invest, because if you have a threat actor who can invest any amount of money, then you just have to assume they're going to get what you want, what you have anyway, right? They pay somebody off to get the access, or take a wrench to their head, or whatever it is. They're going to get there, because now you're talking about espionage, which is maybe a totally separate topic. So you continue to raise the cost to get to whatever it is you're trying to protect.
Yeah, and I think Patrick, you said it earlier kind of perfectly, is assuming a certain level of compromise, which as an internal team, we can make those assumptions going, all right, throw us in that part of the network, throw us over here. And tying everything together, now you can see, Joe, do I have to nuke the whole network and start over, or do I only have two boxes that were accessible from this perspective and this certain assumption? So, and that might play really nicely into documenting that for your vulnerability response plan. What systems have access to it? And I will tie this all up in a nice little bow and saying asset management.
We go back to basics: asset management, asset management, asset management. So we've got, all right, so preparation, asset management, monitoring, assessing. We said triage was a separate step. Are we done? Is that our program? Can we kick this over to the vuln management and incident response teams and say, here's our findings? Or do we continue to work with it ourselves at this point?
I think you send it out. I think you send it out and you say patch. We've verified that this will work if there is a patch. And then as the red team, we'd go in and make sure it was either done correctly or completely mitigated in some way. I mean, doing whatever you can there. I mean, how many times did we see in client networks where they claim they did something and then we go back for a retest and you go, nope, wrong. Try again. So I think you definitely, the next step is act and then verify after that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's such a massive part of it too, because going back to that whole idea of like, understanding trust relationships and what a breach would have meant is if you've got, your red team can go in and sort of, check that this thing was remediated, but also say, depending on the circumstances, let's say that we were like, well, we might need to assume that maybe that this host was breached at some time in the past because we don't know, and the possibility exists. now we want to have our red team say, well, if this box was popped, what would happen? What's exposed? Are there accounts logging into this that give you access to other things? And what does that mean if so? And, do we need to do more forensics, or do we need to get a deeper understanding? So I think it's, that's why that's such a critical part of any of these kind of approaches.
How screwed are we part?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm looking through the Discord chat here, and yeah, I mean, everybody is harping on the asset management piece of this and everything that we've been talking about. It sounds like we're all kind of in alignment here.
Joe, did you see there's I think you're doing a book. It's Kicking and Screaming, Lessons Learned by Joe Pierini.
Yes, I just saw that. That's great. That feels like an ebook that I could publish and give to customers, and along with your proof of value PlexTrac setup. We'll go ahead and give you the lessons learned. So go ahead.
I would say there's one other comment I wanted to call out, and somebody says that this all sounds great, but the reality is different when you're constrained for people and money. I think that's the kind of the hinge point for most organizations, because somebody in management says, I want this to be in place, but we're not going to hire anybody for you to do it. And invariably that's going to leave you vulnerable. Like, that's, if you want to change or architect something or build a new whatever, and you don't make the investment needed to do it securely, you're always going to end up with significant security problems.
Which is why named vulnerabilities help the budget, and that helps everything. Boy, we are tying this up really nicely.
There you go. I like that, Daniel.
So there is a benefit to named vulnerabilities, because it raises the priority and attention within the organization. It's not like I'm thinking where it's just jumping the shark and we're dismissing it. It goes back to asset management, and our basic steps for a vulnerability response program would be preparation, asset management, monitor, assess, triage, and then delegate. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, or maybe failing that, give it to your incident response people. If you've got a good IR team internally, they probably will know how to, if it's not those exact steps, they'll know how to make their current process work to cover this. Give them the time and the money to make sure this is part of their purview.
Yeah, so Patrick,
that 58-minute webinar, and we just tied it up with just give it to your incident response people.
No, you brought two red team and pen testers on here. I mean, I think most of this probably falls on the blue team, and God help them. It's a tough thing to do, but I agree with Patrick on that.
Yeah, it's just the blue team. How many times have we had blue teams come to us asking for how this stuff was done? And I think it's incredibly important for the purple teaming aspect for us to be able to collaborate with the blue team and give them artifacts that they know what to look for. Like you were saying earlier, Daniel, executing the vulnerabilities and letting the blue team then go back through the logs and see how we did it. Those were some of the best trainings and conversations we would have when we were able to get together with the blue teams and tell them, this is what we do during the day, and this is what you should look for when you're investigating a breach.
Yeah, you mean when they weren't mad at us?
Yeah, well, you gotta break a few eggs, right? If you're gonna make an omelet, what the heck? So let's see. Do we have any unanswered questions here? We do have a comment that I like. You'd be surprised at what's actually patched and what isn't. You'd be surprised at what you thought you had patched and the patch never took. So having that extra step of validation, I think, is always incredibly important. Hi, Velda.
Hi, guys.
How are you?
I'm great. And just looking through some of the comments too here on Discord.
Yeah, just anything we missed?
Anything. Yeah. I think you guys were pretty good at picking them up.
Good.
Throughout the webcast. So that's fantastic. Some real positive feedback here too, I think.
I do like the comment of starting to push back against the assume you're hacked narrative. It's like an abusive boyfriend-girlfriend tactic. I have to agree that to a certain extent, it seems like a cop-out to me to say, well, let's just do an assume breach. Well, I want to know whether or not my controls actually work to keep you out. So I do believe those are probably two different engagements.
Yeah, but at what cost? At what cost? If it's a low risk system, fine. But I mean, imagine you're wondering if your domain controller was compromised. You can't wonder that. You got to know. And if you don't know, you have to assume yes. I mean, I get where you're coming from. I'm not sure who posted that, but it's. If we're talking about the system and taking the nuclear option, then you have to go that way. If we're talking about doing perspective-based kind of assume breach testing, I mean, think supply chain. You have zero control over that. One day you get an email that goes, by the way, oops. Doing the assumed breach testing really prepares you for that.
So at this point, we should assume that Okta was in fact breached, and we should be addressing that in whatever activities we take next.
Okta, that's a rough one. It's very I love LAMP situation.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, but it shouldn't be any surprise. And that's the thing. If I have to wrap everything up, is that we need to stop being surprised. These things are going to happen. Okta is going to get breached. Larger organizations are going to go down. We know this historically. This is just what happens when we're, we have these systems on the internet. So having a plan in place, having the right stakeholders, the right information at your fingertips. So when it hits the fan, you know what steps to take next. So hopefully this discussion around the vulnerability response program has got people thinking. Maybe we didn't come up with the exact right steps for your organization. Maybe it is just as simple as kicking it over to your incident response team if you have one. But if you don't, you should probably spend a little time putting a plan together. So Patrick, Daniel, damn guys, it's really good to see you again. I really appreciate you being on this webinar with us. Velda.
Likewise, Joe.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and would love to have you all back in the near future again, if you're willing to do it. So,
Absolutely. And I think a lot of us are going to be at Wild West Hacking Fest in San Diego, and
we'll get to meet in person. That'll be fantastic.
And if you haven't signed up for the giveaway, I think the link is still in Discord. I'll put it up one more time before we sign out. And if you need that resource guide, reach out to me. I'll make sure that you get a copy of that as well. Velda, is there any other housekeeping we need to do? We're at 2:03.
I just posted a link on Wild West Hackin Fest coming up in May. We have pre-conference training, including KIP's hiring handbook training. So please take a look at it. And sorry, my dogs just went crazy.
That's all right.
Is that the mean one or the nice one?
The nice one is the one who started barking. So the mean one, or the naughty one, he's followed the leader. So anyway,
all right.
Guys, thank you again. Thanks everybody for joining us for today's Hacking Cast, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys.
So much.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks all. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.